amenorrhea. Okay, good job, Sarah. But there's a word that comes before that to describe, yes. Secondary amenorrhea means you've already had menarche, but you stop cycling at some point. So then what's the first one? You never start cycling as a period. Primary, that's the difference. Primary amenorrhea, secondary amenorrhea, good job. All right, what hormonal signals might be responsible for that? Amenorrhea of any type. What signals, what hormones might be affecting whether a woman is stopping their cycle or a girl is not starting their cycle? Okay, I'm hearing some adipose tissue. Well, what's the hormone?
No, the fat one, and it comes from the fat. What is that? Leptin.
Okay, you guys got to review this. Got to review this. We talked about this lots of times. You knew this. What else? Insulin's another one. That goes up every time you eat. It's kind of a satiety, fat signal. Yes. So GnRH. That's the master regulator of the cycle. So if something happens to that, it goes down.
Ghrelin is when you don't have fat. Or when you're hungry.
Ghrelin is when you're hungry and your stomach is growling. I think of ghrelin, growling.
And then leptin is when you're full and have fat cells.
Yep. All of these are hormonal signals that basically can kind of affect your cycling, your menstrual cycle, and whether it stops or goes. Okay. There's other stress hormones, right? What about if you're have any of you guys ever been really stressed, like stressed to hell? Yeah. And then you just don't cycle, you stop. You're like, well, I was supposed to have my period. Oh, well, good for me, I don't have it. Something's wrong, clearly. Yeah. That's happened, right? And then it comes randomly. Yeah, 2 weeks later, you're like, oh my God. What hormones are those? Okay, good. Okay, what else? There you go. Corticotropin releasing hormone. I'm going to abbreviate it. You should know it. That's coming from the brain. Hypothalamus is going, too much stress. Corticotropin releasing hormone. Another one comes from the anterior pituitary, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Now you'll see the endocrine system feeds into a lot of other things we're going to talk about in here because it affects human female physiology and health, male as well. All of this, we come back to hormones many times. All right, those are pretty good. Those are the main ones. And if we show a depiction of this, pancreas, insulin, when you're hungry and you're not eating quite enough, your cells, your stomach start making ghrelin. Fat cells, when you have enough of them, in proportion to the amount of fat, you make leptin. All of those end up sort of feeding into neurons, the kiss-peptin neurons. I like to think of like you need a kiss to reproduce. That's silly, but you need a kiss to actually allow those GnRH neurons to regulate reproduction. If those kiss neurons don't say, okay, go ahead, they release their little kiss-peptin that activates this neuron, it's not going to release GnRH. If you don't have GnRH, you don't have FSH-LH, you don't have a menstrual cycle. That's it, plain and simple. So some other factors I think are really, really important. Cortisol, CRH, and ACTH. Okay, really important. Those will actually stop. They will negatively feedback and stop this or that, so you won't have GnRH. Okay? So a couple interesting things before we go on to development, early human development, and how you get a baby from a single-celled egg after it ovulates. These are global issues related to menses and estrogen. And I think these are really fascinating. I've studied these in my own research, actually. So I'll have a little bit of that here. Menstrual taboos, we're all aware of them, right? Different societies, multiple societies all over the world. Centuries, menstruating women were thought to have horrifying effects on the world around them. Okay? So horrifying, like gonna affect the cattle, gonna affect the wine, the church, the man, the family, like not to cook, not to be around animals, even not to like milk goats and cows. So far as that. There's still civilizations, there's small societies in different pockets around the world that still think that, okay? So it's been called the curse. You guys know about this, right? Unclean and unfit for coitus. This is how it's been referred to by many different societies around the world. Females in a lot of places are isolated during menstruation, right? So we still know even today there's rural hunter-gatherer communities and different societies where the women that are menstruating are actually isolated and kind of ostracized and put in a clay hut or a dwelling where they're not allowed to interact with the rest of the members of the group or the society. Because of those fears and this sort of taboo around it. Dates really far back. It's in the Hebrew record, it's in medieval times, even bless you. So all the historical records sort of show that excluded from church, wine cellars, food preparation, different venues like that. Today in the U.S., how this relates to us, how does this relate to us in the U.S.? Yes, Cody?
Like sex education policies in public schools, whether or not people even learn about menstruation.
Right. I don't think I learned about it at all.
I didn't either.
Like, I didn't learn about it at all. They said, yeah, girls get a period, and that was it. It was like all about STDs and scaring the crap out of us. That's really all I got. So I grew up and was like, oh no, we need to learn, we need to teach about these kinds of things. Yeah,
And
Christina.
also too, they don't teach about it, like, but it's very normal, but then they like will pass out condoms in like health classes
Oh, yeah.
and stuff, but they won't pass out tampons.
Right, that's ridiculous. And plus we know, bug out emergency bags, they need maxi pads and tampons in many ways. Those are great to have. We should be giving more of those out instead of condoms. Yeah, you can go anywhere, even Planned Parenthood. You can get a bag, like a trick or treat bag, filled with condoms. They also give feminine products as well there, but a lot of places will just kind of give the protection, the sex contraceptives, and not assistance for menstruation. Yeah, Julia.
I mean, there's also this weird kind of paranoia about like hygiene products in the sense
Right.
that like even taking out like an unused pad during class to like go to the bathroom.
Yeah, it freaks people
you know,
out.
it looks-
Yeah,
even if
it
it's,
freaks people
like,
out.
completely
Oh yeah, I've done that many times. Right. I've done it just like whoop, and then I'm like, oops, should have been in my pocket, or even at the grocery store, right? Like even like buying it.
Yeah, I don't like buying
I've had males buy it, my son buy it, right? I'm like, you know what, get over it, get tough, grow up. It's just like a real thing. It's biology, accept it. And I'm like, okay, fine. You have to teach people, it's not a big deal. Yeah,
I
that's
had
yeah.
a male teacher in high school accused me of trying to sneak snacks out of my bag when it was actually a pad because they crinkle.
Oh,
same
right,
as
great.
snacks
You're like,
do.
no, it's not a snack here. Would you like one? All right, well, today in the U.S., obviously, as you all just pointed out, there are past taboos about menstruation are still like influencing behavior. They still, this patriarchal sort of setup and ostracizing women and going, ooh, yee. It's still kind of there. It still is perpetuated in different ways. Popular media, there's still negative connotations, embarrassment. You know, I admit even myself, I'm like, ooh, like I'm in class or something, my stuff falls over all over the place, and there's tampons where I'm like, gotta pick that up quickly. Ooh, awkward. But if it were something else, it's really not that big of a deal. So it's kind of there. So that aspect of it is there. I will point out some stats and some interesting things. One of these questions was on your first survey quiz in this course, and I asked you true, false, for all the different things, right? 1/5 as much sex occurs during menses. Okay? So that means it's greatly reduced, looking at just the numbers of sex or coitus being had during the menstrual flow. Can pregnancy occur during menses?
Yes.
Why do you say yes?
Because sperm can live in us for 5 days.
Okay, that can true. That can be true. Yes, that can be true. The only problem is though with menses, you're losing. Okay, during this period of time, you are losing the entire endometrium. Okay, the entire endometrium is being sloughed. It is bleeding. It is coming out from the inner uterus through the cervix through the vagina. You're having a flow. So if it's right in the menstrual flow, there's no pregnancy. There's no pregnancy that's going to happen right during that period of time. Okay? So if it's at the end and you're sort of light, it's tapering off, yes, the sperm could inhabit, wait in there, wait at the cervix, wait for time so good signals, chemical signals can ascend and reach an egg if it's ovulated soon enough. So sperm can live for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, right? It can. But during the actual menstrual flow and bleeding, there is no uterine lining for implantation to occur of the early embryo, to take hold, to actually start developing and lead to a clinical pregnancy. So really it's the only time during the cycle that is actually sort of the woman is infertile. So a lot of people, you're just bells and whistles over there, girl. It's okay, it's okay. So a lot of people say yes, but now if it's at the end and you're tapering off and you're like, yeah, there's a chance. But if you are right peak in the middle of menstrual flow, also sperm need to wait and inhabit in the vagina, the lower regions of the female reproductive tract. They actually halt for several hours. Then they get the chemical signals from the reproductive tract to, okay, now let's swim. Some make it pass through the neck of the cervix and into the uterus. And then a smaller number yet still can make it into the fallopian tube, and a smaller yet number make it to the actual egg to fertilize. So if the endometrium is sloughing and there's bleeding, that's going in the opposite direction. It's going to be very, very hard to sperm to penetrate that, reach the egg. Even if it does, the endometrium is gone. Yes? You remember the diagram? The endometrium's down here. Proliferative phase, it builds up. Secretory phase, it gets even bigger, and now it's making lots of healthy secretions. So actually, even though the negative connotations and taboos surrounding this, that would be the time to have sort of sexual intercourse that's you're infertile at that point. But people choose to not do that. Now, I will say, in general, it's not just a patriarchal, female-directed expectations, negativity, isolation, cultural sort of norms. It also, I think, has to do with blood in general. This is my own perspective. I don't get squeamish about blood. I've dissected so many different things. I've seen horrendous stuff. So blood to me is just matter. It's just life. It's science. I see it very much as a specimen. But I know even people in here, very squeamish with blood. And some people are just like, even men, big grown men are like, oh my God, I have a cut. And they're like, oh no, I'm like, get away from me. It's a kind of a life or death. It's a weird sort of thing, blood. Seeing lots of blood and thinking about lots of blood is kind of bad and negative for many people. So there's that as well. So I want to just make sure we don't just get the gender part of it, the stereotypes, the socialization, the norms, the taboos and stuff, but really there's that aspect to it as well. Blood. I know a lot of people don't like it. They're just like, ooh, my gosh, gross. They don't like getting cut. They don't like seeing it and dealing with it. So I will, around the country and the world, we have some negative connotations and stigma here in this country, but in certain pockets around the world, like rural areas in Nepal, rural areas of Venezuela, Islamic tradition, certain places of rural India, women are not allowed to touch cows, banished to a special hut. Southeast Asia, they can't drink from the same water fountains that boys can or men can, fear of contaminating the water. Yeah, this is still today. Kenya, certain places in Kenya, the women of the Maasai tribe, they're semi-nomadic, so they still kind of move around from place to place. They're put into, they can't interact with animals, they can't milk cows or goats, and they're kind of sequestered away. So they actually can't even consume. Only menstruating.
Okay.
While they're menstruating, and they don't have the kinds of devices and feminine products that we have, right? So a lot of times they just have to menstruate or just use wraps and cloths and reeds and different things to sort of absorb it. Cotton, different types of cotton. In rural Ghana, women can't enter a dwelling with a man. They can't cook for a man. They can't do any of that where they're menstruating. So in Venezuela, rural menstruating women are forced to sleep in special huts. So it's like the menstrual hut. All the women are ostracized. Now, you know that women living together in close-knit groups or societies, they start to cycle at the same time, right? You know this?
Yeah.
It happens to many of you, okay?
Yeah.
It's called the dormitory effect. It's a real biological phenomenon. It actually comes from chemical signals coming from women. Women take it in, breathe it, it affects their biology. It synchronizes their menstrual cycles. We're going to talk about that when we get to chemistry and attraction. Sounds weird, but we go into chemicals that affect interactions between people. And the dormitory effect is a good example of those. So I leave it out for now. But sometimes there's the alpha female too that will just like pull everybody in. Like someone's like 20 days later and all of a sudden they're like on this person's cycle. You're like, what are you doing? Stop it. Messed up, my whole pee tracker's all off. What the hell? So it happens. It's a dormitory effect. You start cycling. So you can imagine in these more rural communities and places today that are still doing this, the women are cycling all at the same time. So they're losing like a huge bulk of their female population that can't do this or can't do that or put into these like menstrual huts. That's a little weird. Okay, so the estrogen epidemic is also part of this global sort of situation for modern day women. Modern women have a greater lifetime exposure to estrogen. We've talked about this already. We talked about phytoestrogens. Remember that? So compared to our hunter-gatherer ancestors and current hunter-gatherers, we today have much more higher exposure to estrogen from our bodies and from our surrounding environments. Longer reproductive lifespans, we have earlier menarche, you already know this, and we have later menopause. We're going to talk more about that later. We have less babies. We have less nursing, lactation and nursing. We have more ovulations. Because if you're pregnant, you don't ovulate, right? The whole cycle is suppressed. It doesn't do the kind of just have high progesterone and estrogen and it stays high. You don't do the cycling, you don't ovulate. When you're nursing and lactating, you typically don't either. So the cycle is repressed. So less babies means more cycling of estrogen and FSH and LH up and down. So I got this table from some of this current research that I thought is really fascinating. Looking at our lifetime reproduction and hunter-gatherer women today versus US women today. Age at menarche, 16.1 versus 12.1 to 12.3, somewhere in there. Age at first birth, when they have their first baby, just under 20 years old. Now it's closer to 25. Depending on the study, it's even later than that. Some are saying 27, 28, depending on the demographic and women that are in the study. Menarche to first birth interval, 3.5 years from when they start cycling to when they first have their baby. Now US modern women, it's 13 years plus from when they start cycling to when they have their first baby. So that's a lot of cycling time. Lactation duration per birth. Hunter-gatherer women, about 3 years, they will nurse one baby. So the baby's already getting their little deciduous milk teeth, they're still nursing. In modern US women, it's about a quarter of a year, that's 3 months. Actually, average length of nursing is about 3 months. In some studies, it's a little higher than that. Lifetime lactation duration, 17.1 years for hunter-gatherers, 0.4 for US women. You can see these numbers are dramatically different, right? Totally different regarding menstruation and reproductive parameters. The number of children, 5 versus just under 2. Age at menopause, 47. Now it's a little later, it's closer to 51. So you can see the total reproductive lifespan is longer, less babies, right? Less lactation period of time. So overall, the female cycle is seeing this estrogen at a bigger, higher amount than in our hunter-gatherer comparatives. And this is just showing estrogen, estrone, estriol, and the main active estradiol. They're very, very similar, but this is really the most bioactive common one in women. So the total lifetime ovulations is 160 compared to about 450. Very different. When you're lactating and when you're pregnant and when you're doing all that, you're not ovulating. In general, you're not ovulating. If you're just having normal cycling with very intermittent baby and lactating just a little bit, you're going to have that cycling, that ovulation much more frequently, okay? So it's a big thing. This estrogen epidemic has been described by some reproductive biologists as really severe because we're exposed to things that are called xenoestrogens, environmental pollutants, man-made and plant-based chemicals. They act on estrogen receptors in men and women. So they are endocrine disruptors because they act just like estrogen in the body. So they could exert effects on development, on the menstrual cycle, on fertility, on all these different things, okay? Things like BPA and phthalates, these are plasticizers, these are man-made synthetic chemicals that are used to make plastics sort of malleable and resistant and tough and add those properties to plastics. My lab studies the effects of these, and we look at the effects on early embryo development and growth, and the effects on stem cells and how they divide and replenish. These are actually in everything. They're in everything. Water bottles, Tupperware, sports equipment, dental equipment, sealants, medical equipment, catheters, eyeglasses, DVD coatings, coating the inside of food cans, everywhere. They're in our soil and water systems at fairly high levels. So it's hard to minimize exposure. One way you can do it is use metal and glass when reheating stuff in the microwave, when drinking from them, because they're in all kinds of water bottles. We've even done measurements using mass spec where we look at the content of fluids that are in different receptacles like water bottles, Nalgene's, that actually say BPA free, and they have BPA analogs in them that are replacements for BPA, but they're just like BPA. And in my lab, my students actually look at the effects of those BPA analogs, and in some cases they're worse than the parent compound of BPA. So the BPA free is a marketing strategy. I'll talk more about that later, but it's crazy. We have publications that are in big journals and stuff exactly on this. So a lot of these, insecticides as well, parabens, these are in some sunscreens, aromatic hydrocarbons, DES, diethylstilbestrol, is a really potent, has negative effects on embryo development and fertility. Synthetic estrogens, isoflavones that are in things like soybeans that we talked about. All of these are considered endocrine disruptors. They act as estrogenic compounds. And they can have negative effects because if you're getting them in high levels, that's abnormal. That's different than the normal body. Yeah, Alex.
So is the connection that we're being exposed to more estrogen and then we're cycling more?
Yes, ma'am. Both. We're exposed to more estrogenic disruptors, endocrine disruptors, in what we eat, in what we consume, in what we use, the products we put and we're exposed to. And then our bodies have an overall lifetime higher exposure to estrogen doing this, okay? Even though many women are on oral contraceptive pills, OCPs, or later in life they go through hormone replacement therapy where they get hormones exogenously by pill or injection into their system. So those are really common. So now, even though estrogen cycling and exposure is reduced for many women, so if you're on a pill, you're getting sort of a steady lower dose, intermediate dose of estrogen, typically estrone and progestin, those are the common ones. So you don't have that major cycling, it's still there, but it's for a longer period of time, and we still have a bigger reproductive window. So overall estrogen levels are still higher than our hunter-gatherer ancestors and individuals alive today. Yes? Yes, question?
Yeah, so you were talking about how like in adoption, like if we like adopted someone from like a different country and then they
Yes.
came here, is that like the main reason why their like cycle would adapt to like here?
No.
Okay.
Main reason is nutrition. So usually it's they're in a developing or underdeveloped country, poor nutrition, poor body weight, poor good foods to eat. They come here, they get the nutrition component, they get the body weight, they reach the critical body weight and mass sooner, and they adapt to the new situation. I'm not saying this can impact, this can impact too. But most of the data, remember we talked about this, most of the data holds up with body fat and height and weight.
Okay.
Also their genetics, but the adoption stuff really shows all they have to do is kind of have a better nutrition, have more access to that, increase a little bit of body fat, and they can cycle sooner. This is in addition to all that, so this is extra stuff. The impact of this, you think, well, so what, estrogen is normal. But there's a lot of estrogen cycling to be going through in an average female reproductive lifespan. Increases the risk for things like uterine fibroids, little growths coming off of the uterine tissue, endometriosis. This is fairly common. Endometriosis is endometrial tissue in blood vessels developing in a spot that's not in the endometrium, outside of the uterus, on the cervix, the opening to the vagina, outside the fallopian tubes. It inappropriately responds to those hormones, progesterone and estradiol, and starts to get active. So there's bleeding and cramping and discomfort that's often even worse with endometriosis. If it's severe enough, it can impact fertility, okay, and be difficult conceiving. Also, breast cancer, endometrial cancer, ovarian cancers, all are dramatically increased compared to hunter-gatherer women. We're exposed to lots of estrogen. Even if you do OCPs or at some point in your life, like when you're older, if you do any kind of hormone or estrogen replacement therapy. So our levels for all those are higher. That's why we call it the estrogen epidemic. Because compared to our ancestors and current hunter-gatherers, we're way higher. Okay, so I'll do a lecture capture of fertilization and development. Okay, I'll do it of that so we can go on to the next section, which is sex differentiation or becoming boy and girl. And that's a really fun lecture to do. Those two are coming up next. Thoughts on any of this stuff? I know we're a few minutes before, but what are your thoughts on some of these puberty, menstrual cycling, the estrogen epidemic? Anything? I mean, it affects a lot of us. Yeah.
This is the first time that I think we were just going through live, like, BPA or BPA-free things are a thing at all, like both of those actually is.
Right.
I just see the label on things and, okay, it's not, but it's good to know why.
Right, right. And actually what we found, even with the embryo, I'll show you guys videos later, we can look at a dividing embryo and just expose it to low doses of BPA so we get the compounds directly, put it in a salt solution, and just watch what it does to the embryo. The embryo vastly becomes abnormal. It starts dividing, the cells take a really long time to divide. It ends up with all kinds of aberrant congenital defects, birth defects actually. So it can affect development, fertility, cancer. There's even studies now looking at things like ADHD and autism and different things and linkages with high exposures to BPA. If a woman has high levels of BPA in her blood, by the way, 92% of women and men have BPA detectable levels in their blood and in their urine because we have that much exposure. If the levels are very high, it's associated with increased miscarriage rates in women. So even if it says BPA free, I wouldn't necessarily buy it. Just based in my hands looking at BPA-AF, and I tell my students to think about this, it's like BPA-AF, you know, the bad acronym. That's what you should associate with that one because that one destroys things at very low doses. And incidentally, that's the one that a lot of water bottles and different companies are using to replace BPA. So the estrogenic effects are still there. The negative effects are still there. It's a brilliant marketing strategy because plasticizers and making plastics is a $1 trillion industry. 9 billion tons end up in the oceans every single year. Now it's like it's a huge, everybody's realizing it. Paper straws, bamboo straws, metal straws, don't do the plastics. Try to eliminate plastics as much as possible. That way, for your own health, reproductive health, and for the environment, for me it's like a win-win. It's a dual combo benefit.